So first of all, we wish really to thank you all for your participation in this event that has been organized within the Erasmus Days 2020. Of course, it will be one event online. So you will have very short conference about the first European poppling, and at the end you will have a quiz, and I hope you will all join the quiz, as you will win a wonderful present that I will tell you just at the end. And just to start, this event has been organized with the International Master in Quaternary and Prehistory, that is an Erasmus Mundus Master, start in 2004 and made in partnership between our university, UNIFE, the Muséum d'Histoire Naturelle de Paris, the Istituto Politecnico de Thomas, and the Universitat Rovira i Virgili. So the things that you will see now will be mainly made by professors and students from the Erasmus Mundus Master. Before to start our main topic about the first European poppling, and so prehistory of Europe, I will give the floor to our Erasmus office that will take just a few minutes to explain you how is the Erasmus in the Università of Ferrara. Please, Alessia.
Yeah, okay. Hello, everybody. My name is Alessia. I work at the International Office here at UNIFE, and I will give you some numbers and some information about how UNIFE supports the international mobility. So as I wrote in this slide, outgoing is not only a mood, because our internationalization office deals with the outgoing mobility. So we organize and we create programs in order to give our students the opportunity to spend some time abroad and learn more, learn in terms of culture and in terms of academic offer. So here are our international mobility programs. Erasmus Plus, which is the most famous one, double degrees, Erasmus traineeship, and Atlanta. So just to have an idea about the populing of the Erasmus students, in 1987, 3,244 students from 11 countries spent a semester or the whole academic year abroad. In 2018, they were 853,000. So they did Erasmus from and towards the 28 European countries plus other countries, which are called partner countries. So in 30 years, almost 9 million people have participated to the Erasmus Mobility Program, which is more than New York and London's population. So the Erasmus is the, as I told you before, is the most famous one. And what we do is to help our students to find, through our tutorials, through meetings and social media, as in this period we cannot meet our students physically, so we help our students to find their destination for studying and for traineeship. We provide international mobility scholarships, so we can support them economically. And the main aim of an international mobility program is to be recognized in terms of their academic achievements. So we recognized both in terms of academic international experience, so the exams and the credits they achieve, and in terms of official acknowledgement, just like the diploma supplement and the Ferrara School of, and so on. Our colleagues of the Orientation, Welcome and Incoming Office deals with the international degree seekers, so the international students who want to take a degree in Italy. And so they choose to study at UniFe, and they support them with the application procedure and the and also with several welcome activities, just like the welcome day and the international tutoring. They organize as well orientation events and meetings to clarify doubts connected to the, for example, double degrees courses with the admission requirements, the student benefits, and so on. They activate specific agreements with public and private institutions in order to guarantee additional services and discounts for UniFe students beside the scholarship, and give support for the recognition, of course, of international qualification in order to obtain the Italian academic title. So these are our contacts. Please write and call us for any doubts. We are here at your disposal. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, Alessia. And now we will start, and thank you to Laura also and to Carlo. And now we will start our presentation, very fast round of presentation about the first European poplin. And I will introduce you Christophe Falguière and David Perdot from the Muséum National of Histoire Naturelle of Paris.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. So we will talk about the first human settlements of Europe from the early to the beginning of Middle Pleistocene. This topic raises several questions. First, which dating methods are relevant for establishing a reliable chronology, depending on the geological context, if it is volcanic, like for instance in Italy or in Dmanisi, if it is karstic, as we can find in Spain and in the southern part of France, or if it is a fluvial system in the northern part of Europe. The second question is, are the first settlements older than Jaramillo event, paleomagnetic event? The early Pleistocene period is very difficult to date for many reasons, and because few samples are available for dating purpose. And as we can see on this slide, many sites are present maybe before Jaramillo event. Another question, if you can come back to the first slide, please. Another question concerns the routes that were used to enter Europe. Of course, the main route is the Levantine corridor, because this is the only one to be terrestrial. Other possibilities that cannot be avoided are the Gibraltar Strait and maybe later, but the Sicily island. And finally, the last question, one of the last questions that we propose today is to think about where the earliest settlements, occupations were intermittent or continuous. And the second slide, please, show the main site with their temporality established according dating methods. And in green, it is not very clear, but in green you can see the sites with human remains. Excepting two sites, the first real occupation of Western Europe is about 1.4, 1.2 million years old. After the Brun-Matuyama boundary at about 800,000 years, many sites are observed with Acheulean evidence. And you can see on the slide that the sites with the stars show Acheulean evidence. And I let David, next please.
Yes, indeed, the Acheulean period is particularly marked by the appearance of new and characteristic bifacial tools, new technical behaviors with the bifacial tools like the indexes. This Acheulean associated to new human species emerged in Africa gradually from 1.7, 1.6 million years, but appear very later, at least later in Near East, as you can see on the slide, around 1.4 million years, with sites visible with sites like Ubedia or GBI that we could see on the previous slide, and very much later in Europe, around 0.7 million years, 700,000 years. So there is a gap in the appearance of indexes and Acheulean culture between Africa, also Asia, and Europe. And this gap question the modalities of their arrival, of this new technical behavior, this new behavior. So the questions are they coming from, are they brought in Europe by new population, Acheulean population migrated from Africa or even Asia into Europe around 0.7, or are they the results of in situ, a local cultural evolution derived from indigenous population who lived already in the area in Europe? As we already mentioned that the first settlements in Europe occurred around 1.4, 1.2 million years. So difficult to answer to these issues without first discussing the human fossil records, of this period. So next. For Julie.
For Julie.
Right.
Okay. So I hope you can hear me. So thank you, David and Christophe. So now that we have seen the chronological and cultural perspective of this first human beetling people in Europe, the question is who arrived in Europe at this time. So for that, we have to move back to Africa, where most of the human evolution took place. And we know from several sites in Africa that our genus, so the genus Homo, appeared in Africa more or less 2.5 million years ago. And the first well-defined species in Europe of Homo is the African Homo erectus that everybody knows, and also called Homo ergaster. And this species is the first one to have acquired a complete and efficient bipedality. And this is probably not a coincidence that it's this species that first moved out of Africa, almost more or less 2 million years ago. And the first attestation of this out of Africa is found in the Caucasus in the site of Dmanisi. And what about Europe? So, as we have seen before, Christophe showed you that there is several sites in Europe, a lot of sites in Europe, which testify the arrival of human, but in terms of cultures. However, there is very few sites which bears human remains, but really few, like a couple, actually of sites that bears human remains. And for now, we know that the oldest human remains found in Europe have been found in Spain, in the Sierra de Atapuerca, in the site of Cima dell'Elefante, and it is dated to 1.2 million years, more or less. And in this site, it has been found a fragment of jaw and several isolated human remains, which is not enough to determine the species. That's why we are calling this Homo SCP. Later on, the first very well-defined species in Europe is the Homo antecessor, which is dated to 0.8 million years, and guess where it has been found? In Sierra de Atapuerca, but this time not in Cima dell'Elefante, in another site close to Cima dell'Elefante, which is Grandolina. And this is pretty much all that we have in this time period. So this is what we know on fossil remain of the first European. But now the question is how to correlate all these 3-4 of the human remains that we have found with what happened in Africa. So of course we can make several hypotheses. The most maybe probable one, because probably the most simplest one, is that the first European in Europe are the direct ancestor of the first species that move out of Africa, so the African Homo erectus or Homo ergaster. And that the human that we found in Cima dell'Elefante, probably the human that has produced the cultural aspect of all the other sites in Europe, is the ancestor of the later on Homo antecessor, the one that we found in Spain. And what happened next? Because everybody knows that the most famous European and the first really known European is Neanderthals, but Neanderthals arrived later on. And so from Homo antecessor and after Homo antecessor, the situation is a little bit more complicated because we have more sites and so more data. So the numbers of theories also lots of increasing of the theory. But to be short and to resume the European evolution in 10 seconds, there were probably another migration into Europe later by a species which comes again from Africa and that we call the Homo heidelbergensis. And this Homo heidelbergensis evolved in Europe in Neanderthals. This was the shorter story of the human evolution, at least for the first evening. And now I will give the floor to Bodan, which will explain to us precisely this first out of Africa and why Dmanisi is so much important size to understand the beginning of Europe.
Yes. Hello. So I'm talking about Dmanisi. Dmanisi is a unique archaeological site for paleoanthropologists, burying the most ancient human remains outside of Africa. It granted us with 5 more or less complete crania and a lot of other materials, and thus it conserved an extremely precise picture of both humans who inhabited this area and their environment. But the problem is that none of the contemporaneous sites in Europe or Middle East gives us even close such an abundance of information. Talking about the European peopling, Dmanisi is important first of all because they are actually the first humans in geographical boundary of Europe, because Georgia, being situated on the slopes of Caucasia, is actually this boundary, this geographical boundary of the continent. But their further advancement to Europe is questionable because of this lack of corresponding material in Europe at the same time. Next slide. Dmanisi hominins stand among the first Homo erectus of Africa, having quite a primitive morphology. The biggest face among all the Homo genus, pronounced prognatism, large molars, which became larger from the first molar to the third molar, a primitive feature, and the main small brain case in the lower part of the Homo erectus variability and in the range of Homo habilis. Actually, it is even less than 650. It can be in even less than 650 centimeters because there are specimens with 500 with something cubic centimeters. Cubic centimeters, yes. Lord Kipnitz et al. Even argue that hominins of Dmanisi, in their primitiveness, are even closer to the main evolutionary stem than ones of Africa, and suggesting that Homo erectus potentially could emerge outside of Africa in the Middle East. And importantly, it has a lot of features, some features shared with Far Eastern Homo erectus of Java and China, placing this site of Dmanisi on the main road from Africa to Far East, and thus shading its advancement to Europe, which remains obscure. The main reason for this is the desperate lack of Homo erectus sensulato or any other such an early Homo specimens in the rest of Europe. The time gap between Dmanisi and the oldest fossil in Europe is up to 400,000 years if we accept the dating of Orse equal to 1.4 million years. Next slide. And this time range leaves room to hypothesize about several waves and about discontinuity of this first peopling of Europe, as Christophe Folgers mentioned. Another specimen which allows to further hypothesize in this direction is Homo skull found in southwest Turkey in Kocabaş, which is shown to be morphologically distinct from Dmanisi and its descendants in Far East, and also is situated close to one of the gates to Europe near Bosphorus, and is more recent, 1.6, 1.1 million years. So thus we can, of course, hypothesize that Dmanisi still could populate Europe, and give birth to all the sites, all the hominins we found in Europe already. But alternatively, it could stop in Caucasia or in Middle East, here in Anatolia, and or either extinct soon after its entrance to Europe, giving way to another waves such as this, which could create this site in Kocabaş. So.
Thank you, Bodan. You were supposed to introduce me, but you have not done, so I will take the floor by myself. Speaking about the first European poppling, of course, we cannot forget the site of PREHISTORIC, but if we are considering not really the geographical Europe, but the political one, it's one of the first and oldest sites that attests the human presence in Europe. So PREHISTORIC is located in southern Italy and is located in an active quarry. It means that to excavate it is not so easy. And so for once there is an adventurous excavation like the one of Indiana Jones. even if at the end we still scratch the ground with a screwdriver. And this site is a secondary position site. It means that there was a fissure filled by water and time with the remains of a site, prehistorical site, that probably was located near the surrounding of this karstic fissure. So inside the fissure, there is date on biochronological basis to about 1.5 million years ago. We found the evidence of human activity, but also a lot of fauna remains that are not related really with the human activity. So we have an accumulation of instruments made by Homo, but also of bones of carnivores that probably have not been in contact with Homo, but also herbivores. And some of these herbivores are showing evidence of human intervention, like the cat marks. By the studying of these bones, we know today that probably Homo had secondary access to the carcasses. It means that probably there was before the carnivore, the other carnivore, it was killing the prey, eating first, and the man was also arriving after. Together with this fauna, we have found a lot of lithic industries showing that at that period, I was saying 1.5 million years ago, the prehistorical man was looking basically for cutting edge. So we have only the production of flakes, and those flakes was used mainly by the study of user analysis, utilized for the processing of animal carcasses. Unfortunately, we have not found human remains in these sites because we are not so lucky like our Spanish colleagues. And this is the reason why I will pass the floor to Pierre, who will explain you the characteristic of the first Homo found in Europe.
So we now know some early Europeans thanks to cut stones and other archaeological remains, but we know very few about how they physically look like. Indeed, as you've seen in the previous presentations, we know that they were humans in Europe as soon as 1.5 million years ago, but from this date to 900,000 years ago, we only have a few teeth and a partial mandibular remain. Fortunately, a famous site that yielded human remains dated to circa 860,000 years ago exists in Spain, and it is Grandolina. Grandolina is part of the Sierra de Atapuerca complex, located in northern Spain. The quantity of human remains allowed the Spanish researcher to define the first European species, Homo antecessor. Antecessor meaning ancestor. Next slide, please. You may know that in much more recent periods, we had two main species, Neanderthal and Homo sapiens. The first one lived in Europe and the second one in Africa, before they met and had children together. These two species knew separated stories from about 650,000 years ago, according to the differences between their respective DNA. As Homo antecessor is quite close in time to this split, we may wonder how it is related to both Neanderthals and us. There are two main ways to answer this question: anatomical approaches, so the comparison between the various morphology, and molecular approaches, which means the study of the differences in the DNA or the amino acids sequences. Among molecular approaches, DNA is the most efficient one, but it shows a big issue. DNA does not preserve well. On the opposite, proteins preserve much longer, up to 3 million years, and they prove to be especially useful regarding human evolution, as the extraction of 160,000-year-old proteins allowed to attribute a mandible found in Tibet to a precise extinct population. Next slide, please. Consequently, two Danish and German labs associated to obtain a protein sequence from Homo antecessor tooth. By comparing the sequence obtained from this tooth to other protein sequences of Neanderthal, modern humans, and some other species, they concluded that Homo antecessor is not a common ancestor to Neanderthal and Homo sapiens, but a very close cousin of both. This discovery has interesting implications. For instance, we know that Homo antecessor has a face quite similar to ours, as you can see here. As he was not our ancestor, this modern-like face is in fact probably not that modern, as our ancestors may have had more or less the same facial morphology for more than 1 million years. On the opposite, Neanderthal does not resemble to us because he knew a different story. And the next speaker is going to tell you more about this story.
Okay. Hello, everybody, and good afternoon, good morning, or good day, wherever you are. I'm very happy to participate in this talk and share with all my colleagues and students of the master about this talk about the first people of Europe. I'm gonna talk a little bit briefly about the next period of time that of evolution in Europe that we know relatively very well, because there are a large amount of sites that where have been found human remains. In this map, you can see that there are human remains for this period of the Middle Pleistocene all around Europe. And also we need to take in account that there are more sites that are not appear here, but they have provided listed tours of fauna or other remains. With this period that corresponds to the 780,000 years ago to 128,000 years ago, there are a large amount of sites, but I'm gonna be focusing in one of the sites that is gonna be an example about what we can find in other sites, because really this site has provided the largest amount of fossils for these periods. Next slide, please. One of the sites of the Middle Pleistocene of Europe is Cima de los Huesos, also in Sierra de Atapuerca. Sierra de Atapuerca has appeared a lot of times during this talk, but in that case I'm going to talk about another site, no? That is not the previous that has been presented for Homo antecessor. In Cima de los Huesos is a cave, is a cave site. It means that we need to go inside the cave using speleologist methods to reach one deep shaft and one deep below this. At the bottom of this shaft there is a small chamber where we have found more than 5,000 human remains. That really is the largest accumulation of human remains in any other site. We need to go to Homo sapiens times to find something as tremendous and as amazing as the accumulation of this site. Well, in this site I have been working for the last 30 years. It means that we have a lot of information that I'm going to try to concentrate in a in few minutes. We go next slide, please. The most complete fossil that we have found in this site is this cranium, the cranium that appears here, that is called the cranium 5. Well, the human remains in Cima de los Huesos have been found together with fauna, with carnivores, and also with the only stone tool that is a hand axe. For these reasons and for the type of accumulation, the location, and the context, and the type of the bones and stones that we found there, what we think we have the hypothesis that this has been accumulated by humans. Intentionally, they have carried the bodies and placed it in this part of the cave, together with this hand axe. Well, as I told you, that the cranium 5 is a good example about what we can find in Cima de los Huesos and also in other sites of Europe of this period, of the Middle Pleistocene. Because this cranium 5 combines morphology that corresponds to the Neanderthals together mixed with some other primitive traits. In particular, this cranium has the face is very prognate and very projected forward. That corresponds to the face that has been observed in the Neanderthal. On the contrary, in the back of the skull, in the occipital, is more primitive. They are not larger. They have a smaller brain than the Neanderthals. It means that they are in the way to become a Neanderthal, but they are not really complete Neanderthals. Okay, next slide, please. For this reason, what we think is that the Simanos huesos and also these European populations of the Middle Pleistocene occupied a space in the human evolutionary tree that is between the last common ancestor of the Homo sapiens and Neanderthals being the common ancestor or not. The Heidelbergenses are between these last common ancestors and the Neanderthal lineage. Really, all of them in different anatomical parts, in different parts of the, they show Neanderthal traits that allows to connect this population with the Neanderthals. Even that really the expression of Neanderthal traits in these ancestors or ante-Neanderthals or pre-Neanderthals is not completely and is not equal in all the sites. For this reason, at this moment, the specialists we are discussing about really we need to all of them to group all of these human remains from the Middle Pleistocene of Europe together with Homo heidelbergensis, or we can recognize different populations of different groups. That really is a matter of the following and the next research in the following years. Next slide. Just to end talking about Simanos huesos, I would like to present you something that was an amazing discovery that was done very few years ago. That is the recovery of DNA fossil from in this site, in Simanos huesos. The preservation is so good of the bones at this site, and that we have been able to recover small, short fragments, really very short fragments of nuclear DNA. At the moment, is the oldest DNA found in any site for any human remain, and well, that's what makes this a spectacular and amazing discovery. The nuclear DNA, what has been the information that has been given is that the same that we have given in the fossils. Really, they are corroborate the information that we obtained from the fossils, and really this nuclear DNA of the Simanos huesos seems to closer to the Neanderthals than to any other human group, no? Where we have for the ones who have DNA like Denisovans or Homo sapiens. Then in that case, DNA and fossils are giving the same information and the same conclusion about this ancestry of this Middle Pleistocene population to the Neanderthals. And thanks for listening, and I'm gonna give the turn to speak to Hugo, who will talk about first Homo sapiens in Africa.
Thank you. I'm going to talk about the complex rise of our species with the fossils from Jebel Irhoud. It's a site in Morocco. The first specimens have been found during the 1960s. And they were discovered next to lithic tools that were looking like the one we find in Neanderthal site in Europe. And they have been depicted as Neanderthal when they were discovered. It's no longer the case. The researchers are now focusing on the very flat face of Jebel Irhoud fossils, and that is a modern-like feature. And it now enters in the variability of the first, the morphological variability of the first Homo sapiens. There is also new dating that is pushing back the age of the fossils to 315,000 years, and so it makes them the first fossils to show such modern features in the fossil record so far. Next slide, please. Well, it's the other one. The next one, it would be perfect. Sorry, Marta, can you put the next slide, please?
Julie is managing. She have already put the following one, but maybe it's very heavy. Is it arriving?
Oh.
Ah no, è l'altra, è l'altra che è sbagliata.
Oh, yeah, this one. Yeah, perfect. Thank you. So the new dating and also the situation in North Africa of Jebel Irhoud suggests that there were many different populations, human populations in Europe at this period, and that they all contributed in different proportions during a very long process that lasted for 100,000 of years to the modern human lineage. As we can see, there are specimens in South Africa with Florispad, or in Zambia, or in Ethiopia. And yeah, so they all have contributed to the modern human lineage. Next slide, please. Oh, so yeah, it's the one before. Yeah, thank you. And there is new genetic data that shows that an African population brought new genes to a European population between 450 and 200,000 years ago. And on the other end, we have the fossils from Jebel Irhoud that are among the fossil record of Africa, the one who share the most similarities with Neanderthals. And as we show on the two figures, there is some Neanderthal-like features on the craniums of Irhoud. And that would suggest that they can be part of a population that hybridated with a European population at this period. And it would then show that the human evolution and the Homo sapiens lineage is extremely complex, but it is still an hypothesis, and the very few fossils we have now cannot allow us to go further in the hypothesis. So at least this new genetic data show that the contacts between a European and African population have always been very important for human evolution. And now Sarah will talk about the Sicilian and Sardinian peopling. Thank you.
Thank you. So there is an open debate about the timing of the first arrival of human beings in the islands of Corsica and Sardinia. And actually, a consensus is yet to be found in prehistoric archaeology about this topic. Currently, there are two opposite positionings among researchers. One is that human beings haven't managed to reach Sardinia before the beginning of the Holocene. So the Holocene is the most recent geological era and also the one we are currently living in. It has begun approximately 11,700 years ago at the end of the last glaciation. The other positioning is that human beings have reached Sardinia before the Holocene, namely in the Middle Pleistocene. In particular, the researcher Fabio Martini advocates for this option, and he proposes an age at least 400,000 years ago. This means that he actually considers possible that hominins other than Homo sapiens and actually earlier, what we call pre-sapiens, have reached the island and at least lived for a while in it. For Corsica, as we will briefly see, the situation is actually quite different because we have more clear data. So why is there such a big gap between theories about the first peopling of these islands? To be clear, the debate actually doesn't involve the possibility of an early peopling to have occurred, because most of researchers now think it would have been possible, even for pre-sapiens hominins, to cross short sea boundaries, since this dynamic has recently been proved in other parts of the world, such as Indonesia. But the main problem in Corsica, and especially Sardinia, is the lack of clear evidences. So since in archaeology we don't work on possibilities, but we aim to develop theories from evidences, the debate remains open. Next slide, please. So the problem in Sardinia is that we have few archaeological sites where sets of lithic tools appearing to be very old, let's say lower Paleolithic, have been found. And in most of them, these lithic complexes have no context. This means that they have mostly been found on surface or in contaminated levels. The ones which are in context have not been dated with absolute methods, nor the level in which they were found has been. I mean, methods such as radiocarbon, uranium, thorium, etc. And we have to remember that these sites only have lithic tools as evidence of human occupation. We have no human fossil and no fauna. So how is the dating for these sites proposed by researchers who are studying this topic? Mainly with two methods. One is the pedological study of the stratigraphic profile, which is a method of relative dating that works this way. So the stratigraphy is studied and compared to stratigraphies that are known and dated, looking for similarities. And the other method is the chronotypological attribution of the lithic complexes, namely the characteristics of the lithic industry, knapping techniques, morphology, the raw materials that have been used are again referred to similar lithic complexes which have a dating. So, of course, the results are highly debatable and also kind of subjective. It's not the same to have a specific age calculated in a laboratory. Next slide, please. And we start having absolute dating only later in Corsica, corresponding to the peninsular and in general European Middle Paleolithic. So in that moment, Europe was populated by Neanderthals. Thus, this data opens the possibility that these hominins, Neanderthals, reached Corsica too. For Sardinia, we have no evidences, but at least we know that the crossing of short sea branches had occurred at that time in the Mediterranean, having this data. When the oldest human fossil in Sardinia is already from the late Paleolithic. And it's a fragment of a phalanx found in context in the site of Grotta Corbeddu, near Oliena. And the level was dated at 12,000 years ago with stratigraphic comparisons. So it wasn't directly dated with absolute methods. We have to wait until the late glacial interstitial to find a dated evidence of human presence in Sardinia. And it's not a fossil, but it's a small lithic complex, still in Grotta Corbeddu, found in a level that has been dated between 12,000 years ago with radiometric dating now. And the first human fossil directly dated in Sardinia is from the same archaeological site and belongs to a layer dated 9,000 years ago. So actually the first undisputable evidence of human occupation in Sardinia is already in the Holocene and already in the Neolithic. And about Neolithization is now going to talk extensively Professor Osterbreck. I finished. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sarah. We will do now a chronological jump into a reality which is different from most of what we have heard so far. Because when we enter the discussion on the Neolithic, one first striking element is that we have an abundant number of evidences. The number of evidences is not by itself a solution to our questions, but nevertheless, it allows us to go deeper into comparative studies and using, of course, all the analytical tools that have been described by many of my colleagues before for other contexts. Now, first thing about what this process of politicization, as it has been known. It is, I think we can say, it's a process, of course, of adaptation. It's a continuation of adaptation to processes of climatic change in the transition into the warming period of the Holocene. And in this context, we assist to something which starts already in the Epipaleolithic, which is an acceleration of changes, of transformations, changes in technologies, combination of tools, different strategies, diversity of strategies, demographic growth. And it's very interesting because today, as we all know, there is a discussion for the last 30, 40 years about what scientists call the Great Acceleration related to environmental and for some climatic changes, or at least climatic oscillations that we are experiencing. But in fact, the Neolithic is about something very similar, and in fact, in a much more dramatic context. There was really by then a significant change in the climate, then of the biome because of the development of soils and the vegetation covering them. And this created to humans the challenge of finding new ways of living, of coping the moment what used to be their basic economics failed. This basic economics was, in the case of Europe, based on big herbivores that were hunted, and these animals basically disappear, either because they migrate or because they die out. And then we have two moments of reply. The first answer, which characterizes the first moments of the Holocene in the Epipaleolithic and then the first Mesolithic transition groups, is a moment of adaptation. Adaptation is basically trying to do the same thing in a different environment. So keeping a basically hunting-gathering economy, more or less the same strategic approach, but of course to an environment in which you start having small game, small animals, much faster animals, which implies different hunting techniques, a mostly more diverse set of resources, namely aquatic resources, riverine and coastal, and of course meadows developing on that. This strategy allowed to do a large number of things, but one of the main consequences was a very fast demographic growth. We can measure that in many ways, but of course the number of sites and the number of human remains retrieved is an important element of those evidences. The fact that communities grow have an implication in terms of their capacity to keep on adapting through mobility, which was the traditional response of humans in context of change. And what happens in the Holocene is that when important climatic oscillations occur during the Holocene, particularly dry and cold episodes, and particularly one dry and cold episode around 8.2 thousand years ago, the groups were already too big to keep on having the same adaptive strategy. And then they start developing a combination of that with an intensification of the exploitation of resources. And the ultimate expression of that intensification is producing food through the domestication of animals and of vegetables, of cereals and other vegetables. We see in the process a certain number of trends. These trends are similar with differences in terms of the types of crops and so on, but they are similar in different parts of the world where this transformation occurred independently in the Near East, in Southeast Asia, in California, and so on, in Southern America. Generally, what we see is that there are processes of technological diversification, choosing different techniques to domesticate what is better adapted to specific ecological contexts, and then social complexification as well. The division of labor becomes important in growingly demographic societies, and in that process, interaction becomes growingly the dominant tool of the transformation of the economy. So the traditional adaptation is complemented by this interaction at long distance, changing a model of economy in which in the beginning each group was self-sufficient in producing everything they needed and eventually exchanging only prestige items, for example, rare raw materials like obsidian in parts of the Mediterranean, into a new model in which core elements of the economics and of the survival are no longer produced by those groups. So something we know very well for today, for our societies today, but in fact, the beginning of that process is the Neolithic. And this is what makes it so interesting and also so complex to study. Many consequences arose from that. The emergence a little bit later on of states and warfare is, among others, a major consequence of it. Thank you. And now I introduce Marta Azzarello, I expect, to say goodbye to you.
Okay, I wish before to start our online quiz, I remember you will win a wonderful present. I wish to thank all my colleagues and all the students of International Master in Quaternary and Prehistory, the Erasmus Office UNIFE, who have participated in this happening. And now we'll pass to the final part of our presentation, that will be a quiz on Kahoot.